Hello, everyone, and welcome. Today, I'm going to be talking with you all about information from Chapter 3, Psychological Development in Infancy and Childhood. So, throughout this course, we're going to be doing basically biopsychosocial, biological, psychological, and then sociological aspects of different stages of life. So, let's get started. Um, when we talk about psychological theories, right? So there's a lot of different players who come to mind. The first is Freud. And so that's one of the first things that the textbook is going to go into more detail with you about is Freud's conception of the mind, particularly for infants and young infants and newborns. And he goes into quite a bit of detail about the id, superego, and the ego. And so I would definitely make sure to highlight some of that information in your textbook. Make sure you know some of those terminology. And then the book also on page 99 talks about common defense mechanisms. Now, again, we're thinking about this from infants' perspective, but this is something that defense mechanisms happen all throughout our lives, even many of us today. And this is also very important information to know for things like the licensing exam as well. We'll definitely ask quite a bit about defense mechanisms. So definitely highlight and make a note of some of those. Some other things to keep in mind, the book goes into quite a bit of detail about feminist conceptual frameworks. I use feminist theory for a ton of the research and work that I do, and I used it quite a bit when I was working in the field as well. So it's definitely a strong conceptual framework for you to understand and will be long lasting throughout much of your career. So then the textbook also goes into more information about Piaget. So Piaget's theory of cognitive development. And so he has several different periods for children: the sensory motor period, the pre-operational thought period, the period of concrete operations, and the period of formal operations. So I would definitely familiarize yourself with some of those terms, maybe think of an example for each of those as well. So then we have Vygotsky's theory of cognitive development. So he talks a lot about sociocultural learning of interdependence versus independence. And particularly one of the key concepts is zone of proximal development. And so let me give you an example of this. The textbook defines it as a level of thinking a child can master when participating in an activity by him or herself, compared to the higher level of learning that can occur by watching or interacting with others who know more about the activity. So my 2.5-year-old daughter just recently we got her a little scooter for her to use, and she couldn't really figure out how to use it, and we were having a hard time teaching her how to do it. Well, we went to go play with some cousins who were 1 or 2 years older than her, and they had the exact same scooter. And so she watched them scoot around on the scooter in the driveway, and immediately she picked it up and she understood better how to use the scooter. And then later on, when she was playing independently with the scooter, she already knew what to do with it. So that's kind of an example of interdependence versus independence that the book will talk about. So then the book goes into quite a bit of detail about infants and young adults with regard to their emotional development, infants' emotions in terms of their, crying and smiling and laughing. And then it also talks about attachment and stages of attachments that children go through and the importance of attachment, which relates to an individual's self-concept, self-esteem, and empowerment later on in life. So self-concept is kind of an abstract idea. And so the textbook goes into quite a bit more detail about exploring self-esteem and self-worth, particularly from Harder's work. Then finally, the textbook wraps up this chapter with talking about intellectual disabilities. And so this was formerly referred to or known as mental retardation. And so that terminology is antiquated and no longer used as much. And so we talk about individuals, persons with intellectual disability. And so the book goes into detail about IQ tests and defining intellectual ability, the significance of empowerment and support systems, particularly the role of social workers and how social workers play a role in helping the system and the support system with an individual or a person with an intellectual disability. The textbook gives some great examples, which are really helpful as well. So then there's also different forms of learning disabilities that children can have as well. The textbook goes into great detail about what causes learning disabilities, the effects on the children, interventions that can be done, policies to advocate for children, things like that. And then finally, it also talks about ADD and ADHD and some of the differences between the two, what is being utilized more and more these days. It's a psychiatric diagnosis. It's a syndrome of learning and behavioral problems beginning before age 12 that is characterized by a persistent pattern of inattention, excessive physical movement, and impulsivity that appears in at least two settings. So the book will talk a little bit more about treatment for ADHD, as well as social work roles that social workers play in that. So I hope you all have a fantastic week. Thank you all for joining me, and I look forward to talking to you soon. Thanks.